Hey guys, what's going on? It's Caleb Bakes01. Thank you for joining me again for another random horror review. For today's episode, we have a horror comedy from the country of New Zealand from 2014, shot mockumentary style. I'm pretty sure you guys, if you are familiar with this movie, are starting to connect the dots. But it is the film What We Do in the Shadows. Now, before we get into this one, I just want to quickly explain, I guess, for people who do come back to my channel constantly or are subscribed, you guys probably know I gave you the chance over the past week to choose what movie I did next for my random horror review. No one decided though, and that week is now up, so I just want to give you guys notice that that opportunity to choose is over. I'll give you another chance, some point in the future, but for now, that week is up, and I said if no one chose, I would just decide something myself, and that's what I did. I just went with something that I hadn't seen in a while, and obviously it is the film What We Do in the Shadows. So I just want to let people know that that chance is up, but there will be one again in the future at some point. So this is going to be a pretty basic plot to get into. It's not going to be very long. Basically, we have a mockumentary film crew that follow a flatmate house of vampires living in New Zealand. I believe in the city of Wellington. I've had people before ask me on YouTube if I'm from New Zealand. No, I'm from Australia. I know if you're from a different country, you're probably not going to know what the differences are, or, be like, is there any difference? To be fair, there are a lot of similarities, however, also a lot of differences that I think a lot of people just sort of undermine and don't notice, but fair enough question, but I am Australian. But yeah, it's a pretty simple movie. You've just got a house of 3 vampires that eventually grow into more vampires, and just how they go about their lives, in modern time and living in New Zealand. So it's a pretty basic plot, but we'll get into my thoughts of this one now. So I remember when this one came out, and it was like really praised for being a really good modern horror comedy, and I remember the first time seeing it, it would have been a couple of years after it being out, maybe like 2016, so I would have been like 15, 16, something like that. And I'm not going to lie, when I first seen it, I'd only seen it once before revisiting it for this review. I kind of thought it was a little bit overrated, and looking back I can kind of see why, because one, I was a little bit young and dumb, still am, but younger and dumber, and I guess a lot of the humour just sort of went over my head. It's very subtle humour, it's not trying to make you gut laugh with like these big setup jokes. No, it's just very subtle humour, and you got to almost sort of be paying attention sometimes to get it. So being 15, that sort of may have gone over my head, but then I also remember I watched it really, really late, and I sort of even fell asleep towards the end. So looking back, I do see how I sort of overlooked or thought this one was a little bit overrated back then, but going back to revisit the film this time around, I definitely enjoyed it a lot more. I understood the subtle humour in there. I enjoyed the I enjoyed the mockumentary style the first time around, but I enjoyed it a lot more this time. It just feels very realistic for, how, like, it's a movie about vampires, as realistic as it can be, I guess. I really enjoyed how, like, the crew interact, and how these vampires go about explaining living in modern time, and, living in this house with their flatmates who are also vampires. I just found it very, very interesting. The vampire lore in this one is done really well. It's quite funny, and how they do their twists on it. Yeah, and like the horror, it's more of a comedy than a horror, but you have your gore in there, which they're not too afraid to hold back on. They show spurts of blood, they show people getting torn apart. I feel like it is a really, really good balance of it, even though I do say it probably leans more into comedy territory. I can still see this one pleasing a lot of horror fans. Another thing that I found this time with the comedy that I think helped was, again, just being older and finding a connection between, I guess, New Zealand humour and Australian humour. I think very much in the dialogue delivery. I feel like when you watch movies from different countries, particularly comedy films, it can be very hit or miss, because comedy in different countries, it all comes down to execution and how things are said and how dialogue's written. and sometimes just because it's from a different country, it's going to go over your head. I feel like the similarities between New Zealand and Australia help with understanding the comedy in this film. Just the dialogue of how they speak to each other. It's very relatable, and that's what I found to be a connection this time around with this film, which I enjoyed very, very much. With all that being said, this movie still isn't quite a home run. I mean, with a lot of mockumentary style movies, sometimes there can be slower points, especially when they're trying to make it overly realistic. There can be slow parts because, it's trying to reenact real life. There's not always crazy things 100% going on 100% all of the time. So there are a little bit of slow points. And still, as I said, even though I understood the humor a lot more this time, it's not like every joke was landing. There was still some where I was like, oh, that's a little bit lame. But overall, this time around, I did enjoy this movie a lot more. So I'm going to try and keep this review nice and short and sharp. What We Do in the Shadows, I am going to give it a 6.5 out of 10. I understand how this movie has its fans. I haven't seen the TV show. I know people who have watched the TV show and have said that it's very good. But also a lot of people that have seen the TV show didn't even know there was a movie that the show is based off. So I'm not sure, how to compare the two since they haven't seen the two either. So maybe the show is something I can check out, or let me know in the comments if you've seen the show and if it's any good. But as I said, What We Do in the Shadows, I'm going to give it a 6.5. Pretty enjoyable. Not something I'll come back to overly often, but for a horror comedy, a mockumentary, it's relatively solid. For a vampire movie, relatively solid as well. So would recommend this one, and feel free to check it out, guys. So thank you for joining me again for another random horror review, guys. I appreciate everyone who sticks around to this part. I just want to say I appreciate everyone who is liking my content and commenting on my videos, and getting involved in chats and discussions, or just leaving really nice reviews and comments. I really appreciate that, and especially everyone who is subscribing. If you do subscribe, I am very grateful in the first place, but I would also really recommend if you guys hit the bell icon, because I'm noticing a lot of my videos, a lot of my subscribers aren't always coming back to them. So maybe if you hit the bell icon, I'm still very grateful for those who have subscribed. If you do feel like subscribing, I would really appreciate that. But I'm just going to sort of leave that there, guys. Thank you for joining me again for another random horror review, and I will see you guys very soon. Thanks.